But for now, we turn our attention to Capitol Hill. Joining us now to break down the latest action in the nation's capital is Representative Thomas Massie, the congressman serving Kentucky's 4th District. So, Congressman, right now when we talk about the idea of coronavirus relief legislation, I know that you have voiced some displeasure in the past regarding some of these pieces of legislation. And now with the most recent one, we see that it's once again a divisive topic with the price tag dividing the two chambers, that being the Democratic proposal and the Republican proposal also coming from the White House. Do you think that the American people need this type of legislation right now, or should they wait and see how the economies open up first?
We need to open the economies back up, Alex. You know, the Democrats want to spend $3 trillion, and Nancy Pelosi passed that in our House. I voted against it. Republicans are saying spend $1 trillion. Usually in Washington, D.C., that means when the Democrats and Republicans compromise, they spend $4 trillion. They just add it together. But I think eventually there will be another bill. I think it's somewhat foolhardy to reward the governors who are shutting down their schools and keeping their economies and their restaurants shut down. It's almost as if we have a patient who is bleeding and we're giving them a blood transfusion, but we're not stopping the bleeding. Where's the end to this? I just don't see it. And when I was told on March 27th, oh, let this bill just go by unanimous consent, I complained about the price tag. They said, well, that's so we never have to pass another one of these again. Well, that didn't last very long.
And even when it comes to the president's executive orders, he is somewhat speaking to what you're saying right now. He doesn't want unemployment benefits, for example, to be as high as they were in the previous pieces of legislation. And he also wants the states to take up some of the burden when it comes to that. We heard from California Governor Gavin Newsom say yesterday that he doesn't have that type of budget, and is saying that the federal government is the type of person that should start pushing out that money, giving it to the states as they need it. So when it comes to the president's executive order, we've heard some people voice maybe some frustrations with that as well, saying that that kind of sets a precedent for future presidents to use emergency powers in order to funnel money into different systems. Do you think that the president made the right decision?
Well, first of all, he's correct about one thing. We can't be paying people more money to stay home than they would make if they go to work. That's problematic. So the Democrats just can't get that through their heads, and I think the president's absolutely right on that. By the way, unemployment program should be a state-run program. It has been a state-run program. The only reason they're trying to federalize it is the states can't print money and the federal government can. So I think that's problematic. Now, one of the president's executive orders was to temporarily pause or suspend or delay is probably the right word, payments into the payroll tax. But the payroll tax is actually comprised completely of Social Security and Medicare contributions. I think the fiscally conservative, reasonable, and rational thing to do would be to say, if you don't want to pay into Social Security or Medicare for the next 6 months, then you don't have to. But if you don't pay as much in, you're not going to get as much out. That would be a much more rational thing than to say, oh, we're just going to delay the payments, because we all know what's going to happen when we get to December if these payments have been delayed. They're just going to be forgiven. And what that means is there's going to be a deficit, an even greater deficit in the Social Security and Medicare Trust Fund. So that's a problem that I'm worried about.
And I think you speak to something, too, that is on a lot of Americans' minds, and it's the idea that we shouldn't necessarily just be giving out blanket relief to everybody, no matter where they are. We should, if there is going to be any type of stimulus, I'm hesitant to call it stimulus, maybe more so just relief money, right, it should be directed to someone who is in need of it, someone who, for example, isn't working at the moment, someone who may be facing evictions at the end of the month. I know that you have done this with your Prime Act, for example, kind of focusing where some relief can be going during this time in order to help farmers, in order to help frontline workers, for example, other people who need this. So when we talk about building back this economy, coming out of this crisis, what should the priorities be?
Well, let's look at all the regulations that keep our economy shut down or have made the COVID response even worse. For instance, we've got regulations at the USDA that have enriched 4 of the meat packers that control 85% of the meat processing market. That's hurting farmers and it's hurting consumers. It's driving up prices, causing shortages in the stores, and driving down prices on farms. I've got a bill called the Prime Act that would reduce the regulations and allow farmers to get food directly to consumers without using these monopolies. There are probably other applications like this for reducing regulation in the government. Let's use this crisis as a chance to shrink the size of government and make sure that government's not exacerbating the problems. You know, my hat's off to the president for fast-tracking a lot of the drug cures and the other things with response to the virus at the FDA. We need to do the same thing at the EPA. I know people who've invented new formulations that are like hand sanitizer or to protect surfaces on airplanes. Let's fast track that stuff. Let's look at how we reduce regulations, and that way we can respond to the virus quicker.
And I think you bring up a good point, whether it's Operation Warp Speed in regard to the vaccine, whether it's testing. The private sector has really stepped up during this time. The public-private partnership has really been pivotal in making sure that we get the resources we need during these hardships. I remember it wasn't too long ago where we were talking about that we didn't have enough tests, we didn't have enough ventilators, and it was a very real concern. And because of some of the cutting of the red tape, if you will, that's really helped out this situation. But before I let you go, too, I know that you're in an upcoming docu-series, if you will, on HBO called The Swamp. It's an idea that kind of follows different characters in Washington. You have a role in that. What should viewers expect to see from that?
Well, don't expect to see Schoolhouse Rock, because we take you behind the scenes and show you how it really works in Washington, D.C. HBO spent several $1 million making this movie, and Matt Gaetz, Ken Buck, and I, 3 Republicans, conservatives, gave them unprecedented access to our homes, to our staff, to our offices, and brought them behind the scenes. It's surprisingly fair to conservatives in the show, even though the movie was edited in Hollywood. And I would encourage people to watch that on streaming, you know, borrow somebody else's password if you're really cheap to watch it. I probably shouldn't say that. But get it on HBO, watch The Swamp, and I don't think you'll ever look at Washington, D.C. the same.
No, I already asked my parents for their accounts. Here I am at 29 still doing that. So I'm not
I borrow my kid's account.
See, there you go. It's interesting how the two roles tend to reverse. Representative Massie, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.